Hello.
Hey,
Hey, Nuno. How are
how are
you?
you, Flossie? Really good. Yourself?
Good. I'm good, thank you. Whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in Portugal at the moment. Yeah, in Coimbra.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, hi to everybody watching and thanks for tuning in. Today we have Nuno with us. He is a marine biologist, researcher, and a conservation photographer. So he has a series of amazing photographs to show us, and he's going to tell us a bit about how you can connect the worlds of photography and conservation and science. Before I pass you over to Nuno, I'll tell you the technical information. So this webinar will last between 40 minutes to an hour. Nuno will give a presentation on his work and then we'll take questions. So as audience members, your audio and video is automatically switched off, but we would love to hear from you. So if you have a question for Nuno at any time throughout the webinar, please just put it in the Q&A box, which is on your Zoom toolbar, probably at the bottom or the top of your screen. Any questions or comments in there, and we will try and get through as many as possible at the end of Nuno's talk. Okay, over to you, Nuno.
Thank you so much. Okay, let me just see if this works.
Perfect.
Okay, is it on?
Yeah, looks great.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Today I would like to share with you some of my work as a conservation photographer. So some moments that caught my attention and that I felt impelled to photograph so that I could share them with the general public. It all started a long time ago. I can tell you exactly when. There was this strong attraction for the ocean and its inhabitants. And basically any excuse to be in the water or near the water was a good one. So marine biology and scuba diving were obvious career choices for me as I could study marine life and get close to it. I started diving about 20 years ago in Berlengas. It's a marine protected area about 60 miles north of Lisbon in Portugal. And I remember this was about, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years later, I was working on my first book. It was a local marine fauna guide. And I started taking my first underwater photos. And I remember how overwhelmed I felt when I realized the impact that some photos had among some of my friends and colleagues that were absolutely clueless on how rich and colorful Portuguese waters were until they've seen those photos. So the area is indeed extremely rich, as you can see by this photo. This was one of the first photos I took in Berlengas, and by the colors here, one could think that this was taken in a tropical place far away from Portugal, like the Maldives, for example. But indeed, we have some greater biodiversity sometimes in our doorstep. We just have to explore and pay attention. So a closer look to this soft corals, these pink soft corals, makes us realize that they're actually the habitat for an amazing group of small animals like this nudibranch, which is not much bigger than my thumbnail. Unfortunately, this habitat, these corals form an habitat, and these habitats are being destroyed at an alarming rate, particularly by fishing devices like trawlers that wipe out these corals from the seafloor and jeopardize the habitat for such an immense number of these small organisms that rely on these habitats. This photo, I took it about 13 years ago, and I had no idea what it was when I saw it the first time. So after some research, when I went back home, I realized this was an anemone, a buried anemone to be more precise. And this photo, sorry, this photo represented the northernmost record for this species at that time. And when you dive in the same spot today, you easily can find 4 or 5 of these animals in one dive alone. And the same is true for many species of algae, mollusks, and even fishes, in a strong suggestion of global warming. Now, I remember I used this photo along with some others of different organisms in one of my first scientific publications, which focused on the presence of tropical and subtropical species in Portugal, which is a temperate region. Now this photo, I call it the underwater gardens. Beautiful garden of algae underwater. And it was taken up in a place not far from Berlengas. It was taken in Peniche, in the mainland. And this is not the typical scenario you would see in this place throughout the year. This was caused by strong upwelling events. So upwelling is these cold water currents that come from the deep ocean and are really rich in nutrients. And this was the beginning of the summer, so there was a lot of sunlight hours, and this all this sunlight, all these hours of light, with combined with a lot of nutrients in the water, created the perfect conditions for these algae to thrive and to create this amazing scenario. Now, at the beginning of the summer is also the breeding season for a lot of species of fishes and invertebrates, which so these larvae and juveniles of these fish and invertebrates find here the perfect habitat to hide from predators, what scientists call nursery areas. And these nursery areas increase the survival rate for these species greatly, and hence their importance. So the problem is with global warming being now these upwelling events are becoming less frequent and less intense, jeopardizing these nursery areas and compromising these species sustainability. Now, ghost fishing is it's a big threat to our oceans today. Any fishing device like traps or nets that are discarded or abandoned and that keep fishing forever and killing marine life. I found these two pufferfish trapped stuck inside this trap. This was in the Cape Verde Islands in Africa about 3 years ago. And I found these two little guys stuck inside this trap, and they were unable to come out and would eventually have died if they had not been released right after taking this photo. And I remember I also brought this trap to shore to prevent any more deaths. Non-animals have the same luck, unfortunately. This juvenile green sea turtle was founded on the same trip, also in Cape Verde Islands, and it had been living in a sheltered bay close to the city where I was staying for the past year. And this was great for the local dive center, as they could take divers to see these iconic animals. Divers are always eager to see these turtles. And this was absolutely the perfect scenario because they were saving a lot of money on fuel compared to before, when they had to travel 3 times the same distance to take tourists to see turtles. And as I was observing and photographing this green sea turtle, I was realizing the impact that one single animal can have in a small business such as a dive center. And I can tell you that about 3 months later, I was informed that Margarita was found dead, entangled in a fishing net. So, ghost fishing. On a more positive note about sea turtles, here's a loggerhead sea turtle. Sea turtle is a different species, endangered as well. And this was taken in Fayal in the Azores. So loggerhead sea turtles are relatively common in the Northeast Atlantic. So they hatch in the beaches of Florida, and they cross the Atlantic through the Gulf Stream, reaching the Azores, Madeira, and Canary Islands, that region. So there's a really nice program in the Azores. They call it the Programa Costa, where they capture some of these turtles. They tag them. They use a tag to tag these turtles and release them back into the wild. Now, the aim is to know more about these species by tagging them. They can know more about their migratory routes and their ecology, and better implement protection measures for these species. Here's one of them being released after tagging. Now, after all this long journey from across the Atlantic, many of them reach the Azores weak, malnourished, and dehydrated. And actually, some of them don't make it. Now, thanks to a group of organizations working together, it is possible to rescue and rehabilitate and then release back these animals to the wild once they're fully recovered. That was the case for this small Loggerhead Sea Turtle. It's not much bigger than 10 centimeters. And it was very weak and dehydrated when it was rescued by the marine biologists of Aquarium Portpin in Fayal, the Azores. So after about 2 months of daily care and a lot of food, it was fully recovered and it was possible to release it back into the wild. Now, speaking of long migrations, and I could not skip talking about manta rays or devil rays in this talk. This is a sickle-fin devil ray, Mobula trapacana. It was taken in Santa Maria in the Azores about 2 years ago. This animal is listed as endangered by the IUCN and has been the focus of research for scientists for some years now, as it try to better understand their ecology in order to find better strategies to protect them. Now, probably some of you have seen Ana Filipa Sobral's webinar some days ago, where she mentioned that these animals, these species, is usually found in the summer months around seamounts in the Azores. So this photo was taken in Ambrosio Seamount in Santa Maria, and this represents an amazing opportunity for researchers to study these animals in situ, because considering this is a typically oceanic animal. Now here's an Filipa working. So she has a biopsy pole in her hand, and she's collecting a small piece of tissue from this animal so she can use in her genetic studies. And I remember when I got to the Azores to follow Ana Filipa's work, she asked me specifically to photograph the ventral side of the devil rays. So that's me in the water, photographing one of the rays that was in the water with us that day, a photo from my good friend, Roberto Formiga. And this is the resulting image. And well, this is really interesting. I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I'll say it anyway. Ana Filipa can use a specific software, and she uploads this photo to the software, and the software recognizes the gray pattern on the ventral ends of this ray, and then identifies it as an individual, and identifies many individuals by the ventral side. So it's just like a fingerprint. And this allows the researchers to track individuals along their migratory routes and better understand their ecology and behavior, so they can, again, find better solutions for their protection. So I've chosen this photo as I think it represents one of the main threats that sharks face nowadays at a global scale, which is shark finning. Shark finning is the act of removing fins from a shark and basically discard the shark back to the rest of the shark back in the water. So these sharks, without their fins, are unable to swim, and they sink to the ocean seafloor and end up dying because they need to be constantly swimming. So without their fins, they will end up dying of suffocation. So it's important to say that we're talking about an apex predator, and that has a key role in the ecosystem balance. Now, in the Azores, particularly in the islands of Pico and Fayal, these sharks, and namely blue sharks, this is a photo of a blue shark, they're relatively common in these waters, and they represent an even more important role for the local economy, as they attract divers from all over the world that come to the Azores to dive and to photograph these animals. I mean, it's a beautiful animal. It's one of my favorite sharks. So this is the typical example that it shows how an animal worth much more alive than dead. Now, these sharks are curious and they approach divers often, and this fact allowed researchers to think of a very ingenious methodology to study the movement of these sharks in Azorean waters and better understand the functional ecology of the most fish species of shark at a global scale. So through a transmitter, a prototype of a transmitter, they attach this transmitter to the shark, they tag the shark with the transmitter, and they can collect data like temperature, depth, light intensity, velocity, acceleration, and a lot of crucial information that once together and recovered, and also precise location of the animal. So once they gather all this information together, they can understand better these sharks' movements and this shark behavior. And again, all this information can help to better protect these animals. Now here's the shark a few seconds after being tagged and with information already being recorded. Now this really interesting thing about this tagging device is that it's got a galvanic ring which dissolves in salt water. So from 24 to 48 hours, it will be completely dissolved, and this device will detach from the shark and float back to the surface. Once at the surface, it sends a signal that can be tracked by the scientists via GPS and radio and can be recovered and the information downloaded. So I've taken this photo in Porto Santo Island. It's an island also in Portugal. And this is more or less the scenario you would see of Porto Santo seafloor. You don't see algae, you don't see corals, it's rock and sand, bare naked rock. And one wonders what's the reason for this? Why is that this absence of life apparently? And the reason is mainly one: sea urchins. Sea urchins are herbivores and they prey on algae. And the truth is there are many herbivores in Porto Santo, too many, if I may say. And any algae that starts to grow is eaten instantly by these sea urchins. So imagine that we're talking about the absence of primary producers in the ecosystem, which is concerning. But there are also the basis of where a lot of organisms, the habitat for many organisms that are the basis of the whole food chain. So this is typically an unbalanced ecosystem. So it takes me to the question, why are there so many sea urchins in Porto Santo? And the reason is mainly one: overfishing, and particularly overfishing of sea urchin's main predator, which is the hogfish. This beautiful fish, it's also considered a trophy by spearfishing and sport fishing, and its meat reaches high commercial value. So this species has been intensively fished in the last decades to a point where their numbers are so low, and the sea urchins, they have no predators. So their population basically exploded. Now, this photo was taken inside a marine protected area, and where the hogfish are still relatively common. And you can see some differences in the substrate, in the seafloor. So with more hogfish, you see less sea urchin, you see some algae, and you see greater biodiversity. And that is the number one reason for the existence of marine protected areas, and that is why they are so important. Now, this photo is of one of the most charismatic species that lives in my region of the world. It's the Dusky Grouper. This species, once common throughout the Northeastern Atlantic and Mediterranean, is now listed as endangered by the IUCN, and it's rare to see except inside marine protected areas again. So this photo, of a Dusky Grouper was taken inside a marine protected area. Particularly, this one was taken in Formigas Island, also in the Azores. And the remoteness of in Formigas, you have these gigantic and curious groupers that basically pose for photographers, as you can see. So the remoteness of the place and the protection regime existing there allows these animals to grow, to thrive, and to reproduce like they would do centuries ago along their distribution range. So I believe the message is clear. The oceans are resilient and can recover, but we have to do our part and allow this to happen. This, if we want to see our children and grandchildren to be able to see dusky groupers, blue sharks, hogfish, manta rays, or green sea turtles, and not just from turtles. And that's it for my talk. You can follow me on Instagram, and you can know a little bit more about my work on my website. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nuno.
Thank you.
That was super interesting, and I love those pictures of the sicklefin devil rays.
All right, I'm sure you do.
They're so beautiful. What's it like to swim with those?
Oh, it was the first time for me swimming with those animals, and I had no idea they got so close to you. They come and they inspect you, like Anna Filipa said in her webinar. They are curious, and they come really close to you and check you out. So I became fan of sicklefin devil rays. Really cool.
I've heard they're very curious.
Yeah.
And have you seen many of the oceanic mantas in the Azores?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've seen them in Fiji. I've seen one or two in Fiji. I have not seen them in the Azores yet. Hopefully I'll see them soon because I'm heading to the Azores as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, we'll start the questions with one that we usually ask. What's your most memorable moment, or a couple of your most memorable moments in the ocean?
Okay, I've had some really interesting moments, but I will have to choose the time. It was last year when I was in the water with the sperm whale. Mm-hmm. So that was probably one of my most interesting encounters with the sperm whale. That was really crazy. In a good way, of course.
Like interacting with you, or?
Well, it didn't interact much. Basically, he spotted me and swam away. He didn't want much conversation, so he just come close to me, checked me out, and swam away.
Okay.
But yeah, but it was intense. It was intense. It's such a big and magnificent animal. So yeah, I would have to choose that moment. Yeah.
I've never seen a sperm whale in the water or out of the water, I don't think.
Okay.
So that must be a cool experience.
It is, yeah.
Okay, next question. We've got one here from Laura. She's asked what your biggest challenge as a photographer is.
Wow. Tough question.
Yeah.
My biggest challenge as a photographer, I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna have to say being at the right time, at the right place, on the right time, at the right place. That's pretty much what photography is about, particularly wildlife photography. You have to be in the right place at the right time. Otherwise, you just miss the photo. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And of course, you can do something to minimize or to optimize the chances of being successful, and that is studying the animals you're working with, and that's a big part of what I do when I'm not in the water. I try to study what I want to photograph, the story I want to cover, and that definitely gives you some hints of what can happen once you meet the animal and you can anticipate its movements. So yeah.
Very nice. Cool. And I also find when you're actually researching and you're in the water a lot, it gives you unexpected encounters as well. So I'm sure you've had those experiences.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, no matter how much you study, you go in the water and it's a humbling experience. I mean, there's so much to learn and so much you don't know. And yeah, I mean, one lifetime is not enough.
Definitely not. Okay, cool. Thank you. We've got one here from Louis or Louise. They said, what should be done against species like sea urchins destroying the algae?
Well, what can be done specifically in malaria in the Azores, what you can do is increase the effectiveness of marine protected areas, increase their size, increase reinforcement, increase the studies that are done in these marine protected areas in order to bring back sea urchin's main predator, and to allow to nature to do its normal thing and to readjust and balance back again to what it was before human intervention. So I think that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah, definitely. And is Portugal a good country for marine protected areas?
Well, I want to be nice and say yes, but as any country, we've got our issues, and I think there's a lot more that should be done. Even though there's been an effort, particularly in the, I'm going to say, last decade, to make things better, and the studies, even though are always short, I'm going to say short, should be increased, and again, there's usually a problem of funding. So yeah, we have to make sure there's funding and opportunities to put in place these studies that would make a big difference in terms of effectiveness of these initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Right, we have one from Ariana. She says, hello, what's the animal you enjoy photographing the most?
Mm-hmm.
Another tricky one.
I think I'll have to go with sperm whale again, because it's a funny story. I mean, I flew to the Azores, and I planned, this was 2 years ago. I flew to the Azores for a week, and we had the special permit to dive with sperm whales in order to get photos. You need a special permit for that. And we got the permit, and we got there, and the sea was rough for the whole week, and the water was green. We went out, we went in the water, but the visibility was really bad. We could see sperm whales, we could see fin whales, we could see blue whales. At one time, there was 3 blue whales in the water, but you jump in the water and you don't see nothing. Basically, it was green or gray. It was something weird, but you could not see the animals in the water. It was a great experience, though. I mean, you were seeing some of the greatest animals on in the ocean right there, but we could not get the photos we needed. So I came back the year after, so last year, and this time I went 1 month later in the year, because I thought the odds of getting clearer water were greater, and indeed it were, but the animals were not as many as the year before, and they were not keen to cooperate with the photographer. So basically, the whole time we were there for 2 weeks, we were struggling to find animals that allowed us to get close enough to jump in the water and to get the photos. So after 3 or 4 days of being in the Azores, this storm came, and of course it lasted for almost till the end of the trip. Wow. And I remember the last day, and it's always on the last day, of course, we managed to go in the water. We found the sperm whale. I managed to jump in and get close to the sperm whale and snap 2 or 3 shots. That was it. That was the only time, and that was the only opportunity I had. So yeah, so that was the one of the best moments and one of the toughest moments to find the animal in photograph. So I think I'm gonna have to choose that moment.
Okay, cool. That sounds like one of the biggest challenges as well.
Yes.
A very challenging couple of weeks or more. Okay, we have one from Miriam. She would like to know a bit more about how you got into photography. She's asking if you studied photography as well as being a researcher, or if you took any specific courses.
I did not study photography. I studied marine biology and did my master's in marine biology. I still work as a researcher. So photography came as a tool when I was working on my first book. I was realizing that there were some species were missing in that book. Some species that I remember of finding while I was diving, and I said, well, there's some species missing here. And I was working with a photographer, and well, it was just one. And I said, well, I could maybe try to help you and go in the water. The university has a small camera. I could probably borrow their camera and do some photos of animals that I find on the water. So that's how it all started. So I had this small compact camera from the university. I started going in the water and looking for all the missing species that I knew that they were there, but we had no photos yet. So it was really interesting to find that there was so many stuff that I didn't know until I started photographing. So that's a curious thing. I mean, you think you've seen everything, and then you start photographing, especially when you start using macro. So you're looking for small organisms, and suddenly there's a whole new world that you're completely unaware of because you're mostly focusing on the fish and the big stuff. So yeah, I did not do any course, an underwater photography course. It just was by making a lot of mistakes and talking with people that were more experienced in the field, and as I still do, I listen to a lot of people that are in the field and are good photographers. I see a lot of photography books. I try to see as much webinars on photography as I can and about conservation and try to link them together. So yeah, that's pretty much how it worked for me.
Perfect. Okay, good. Some good tips there, I think. Right, we've got one from Harris. Harris would like to know if you prefer to scuba or free dive when photographing.
Yeah, I'm gonna say free diving is more challenging sometimes. Well, for some animals, you have to free dive. For example, for sperm whales, you cannot photograph sperm whale, or it's very difficult to photograph sperm whales while in scuba because they'll swim away because of the bubbles. So for some animals, you definitely have to go with free diving. And when you're free diving, I mean, you're, as the name says, you're much more free, and there's usually less drag, and it's a different experience. I cannot say that I prefer one compared to the other, because they have different they can be applied in different situations for different species. So I like both things because they allow me to cover a wider range of what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I love free diving with animals, but sometimes you've got to scuba to get what you want, haven't you?
That's the only way.
But mantas are like you were saying with the sperm whale, the mantas in the Maldives, we often
isn't it?
Free dive because they're moving so fast. So yeah, you couldn't scuba.
No, too much drag.
Yeah. Okay. We have a good one from Karen. Hi, Karen. She would like to know what your advice is on the importance of respecting distance whilst interacting with wild animals.
Great question. It's extremely important. I mean, animals have their own way of their lifestyle, their way of doing things. And when you're coming too close and to interact with them, you're definitely interrupting something there. One thing is when you're in the water and the animal comes to you because you're curious, and that's what I do when I'm photographing. That was the example with the sperm whale. I swam a little bit towards the sperm whale, but I didn't go straight to it. And at some point, I think he felt that I was there, or he saw me, and then he came to me and approached me, and that's when I got a chance to photograph. But as I said, it was just for a few seconds, and he just swam away. The same with the Manta Rays, the same with the blue sharks. These are curious animals. They come to you, and usually when you approach these animals and you start chasing an animal, it will just swim away. But it doesn't work for photography most of the times. It doesn't work if you're chasing an animal. It will just swim away faster than you most of the times. So it will just ruin your moment in the photo, and you're stressing an animal. So so it's a great question, and yeah, I always try not to disturb the animals' space.
Yeah, it's best if they come to you.
Absolutely.
The best experiences, but you have to be very patient.
You do, yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you. We have one from Anna. Anna's asking if you're doing any photography now in quarantine. and if you are seeing any changes in marine animal behaviour due to less human interaction.
So yeah, I did some photography in quarantine. A few days ago, I went to the river nearby my hometown, and I found a dead lamprey, which I've never seen before. So I it was dead, but I collected it because I knew that it would be interesting for a lot of my colleagues and friends. And I took some photos, close up of the mouth and the gills, and I sent them to some of my friends and colleagues that I know that they will use these photos in their classes. So it's just a really weird animal, and so I thought it was interesting to get some photos of that. Other than that, I haven't done much, to be honest. Pretty much stuck at home, and well, it's difficult to have imagination to do more photos. I'm sorry, I forgot the second question.
So the second one was, have you seen any changes in marine animal behaviour due to less human interaction? So maybe you can just guess at whether there would be any changes.
Well, yeah, I have not been in the water since this whole thing started. I'm not sure if this is a really short period of time to see any changes, but well, you hear the news and you see that some animals are basically taking over the cities and occupying the channels in Venice. So I think this is good news. It means, like I said in my talk, the environment, the oceans can recover and come back at some point, provided we give them space and time. So I'm really curious to go back to the field and try to understand if even such a small, short time has had any effect. I'm going to say yes for some species. It depends a lot on the species. It depends a lot on the species. But yeah, a lot less marine traffic might also affect whales in a positive way. Let's see also if all things coming back to normal, to the new normal, as they say now, will have a bad impact, even greater impact in a negative way, because these animals are in an area that we usually are, I don't know, passing with boats or occupying their environment. Well, let's see.
Yeah. For me, it's nice to think of the mantas having a little bit of a break from all the tourists for once.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Specific those situations in specific. Oh, I'm sure they're having a nice break.
The best time ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think we'll just have a couple more. So we have one here from Zhao, who I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Yeah. And he's asking if you have any projects coming up and if you're going to be writing any more books.
I have a few projects coming up. I'll, as I said before, my plan is to fly to the Azores as soon as possible, and hopefully I'll be able to cover some of the research projects that the local university is working on, including mobile rays, blue sharks, hopefully sperm whales. We've got the permit for this year's. We are still waiting for approval, actually, for the permit to dive with the stations in general. So sperm whales and other stations if possible, but also dolphins. So these are some of the short-term projects. I've got some other projects, but they're still classified at the moment.
Oh, okay. Very mysterious.
Yeah, but yeah, some exciting stuff coming up soon.
Yeah, the short-term projects sound amazing. Blue sharks.
Yeah.
Devil rays.
Oh, it's the Azores is such an amazing place.
So, yeah, I need to make it there one day.
You do. Yeah.
Okay, and last one. We have been asking quite a few people this. We wondered if you have a recommendation of a book or documentary about the natural world that people could watch whilst.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I do. I actually have both a book and a documentary. A book is it's a classic, but I think everyone that is somehow connected to the ocean should read, and it's called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, French writer. So it's very interesting to see how the ocean has always been a motive of curiosity since always. So this was in the late 1800s, I think. So these ships were finding this, talking about this huge creature that was in the ocean and sinking ships and making damage to the ships, and everyone was really curious about what it was. It was speculation about a giant narwhal. Wow. So this expedition was organized and departed from New York to find this supposedly giant sea monster. And I will not tell anything more for the ones who haven't read yet.
I haven't actually read that, and I think I'm going to read it now.
You should, yeah. It's a great book. And for the documentary, I've chosen the Compasso Expeditions. It's by a French marine biologist, explorer, and amazing underwater photographer, Laurent Balesta. And he's been studying some of the rarest and most elusive marine creatures and phenomena on Earth. So they use a mix of, so their activities consistently marked by triple challenge of technical, scientific, and artistic nature. And they have 4 expeditions which turned into documentaries released already. And it goes, the first one, I recommend the first one. It's called Compasso 1, and where they undergo 40 days of deep water diving to meet the legendary living fossil, the coelacanth, the fish, the coelacanth. And they have the second one, I think it's in the Antarctica. And the third one is about the spawning groupers, I believe in French Polynesia, I'm not sure. And the fourth one is about sharks, gray sharks, that they call it 700 sharks, a pack of sharks, something like that, that get together in the same spot as the groupers to hunt at night. And they're in the water with the sharks. So these are 4 really good documentaries, and with a mix of science and exploration and technology. So I think they're really good.
Cool, thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
definitely going to watch at least the 4th one, because I've been told about that one before as well.
Yes, really good.
Really good. Okay, that's it, Nuno. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Floss. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Such a great talk. And I hope you can get back to the Azores very soon and share with us some of your photographs.
I will.
Okay, awesome. So for everyone watching, thank you as always for watching. It's great to have you with us. We have plenty more webinars coming up over the next few weeks. One of them is on Wednesday at 4 p.m. BST. That's with Caitlin Zer. She works in the Maldives, but she grew up on a farm in the middle of Canada. So she's going to be talking about how you can achieve success in marine conservation, and it'll be a great talk for any aspiring marine biologists out there. Then we have Neve again at 3 p.m. on Friday, talking about manta research trips that you can come on with the Manta Trust. As always, find information about Manta Rays and about how you can help us on our website and our social media pages. And one of the best ways you can support us is to join the Cyclone. It's a members-only hub where we share all of our latest research and some of our research expeditions with you. So you can join the Cyclone or adopt a manta, and any funds raised will go straight towards manta research and conservation. Okay, thanks very much, guys, and hopefully see some of you on Wednesday. Bye, Nuno.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.